Hunter vs. Paladin is often thought of as a clash between an uncatchable force and an unkillable object. At least that is how it is seen by most of the Paladin player base. The truth, however, is that if played correctly with the correct gear and item usage, a Paladin should always beat a Hunter in PvP. It is simply a matter of math, range, sustain, and ultimately cooldowns. To begin with, it is important to know just how long your chosen spec of Paladin can last against a Hunter before inevitably succumbing to their shenanigans. The short answer to this question is that in open world PvP, a Hunter can never bring enough DPS to bear on any of the Paladin specs to actually kill them. The reason for this is the ease at which the Paladin can find the nearest world mob and just leech mana off of it using Judgment of Wisdom. This creates an unwinnable scenario for the Hunter, as in order to beat a Paladin going fully defensively with a shield, which is exactly what you should be doing by the way, a Hunter needs to close, scattershot, feign death, and ice trap the Paladin repeatedly, whereupon the Hunter has about 10 seconds to eat and drink before the ice trap wears off. For Holy Paladins, this process can require up to 5 ice traps before the Hunter has enough resources up on the Paladin to beat the Paladin, and up to 3 ice traps for defeating a ret-geared Paladin. Furthermore, this is ultimately the default number of ice trap resets needed for a Hunter in order to win under no-pot dueling conditions. Under true PvP conditions, however, the number of resets needed can skyrocket if the Paladin is allowed to use mana potions. Out in the open world, however, there is rarely a need to even use mana potions, as you can just aggro a mob and either get your mana back that way, or just use the mob to make you immune to being ice-trapped in the first place, while you decide what to do from there. As for true PvP conditions, such as in Battlegrounds, where potions are allowed but there are no mobs for you to use as anti-CC, the situation is much the same, as it takes so long for the Hunter to actually kill a Paladin that something else will almost always come along to break the stalemate long before there was ever any chance of actually dying to the Hunter. Dueling a Hunter, however, with no pots and no mobs is a completely different beast. The only advantages you have here are that the Hunter is somewhat trapped in a circle with you, and so cannot kite you forever if your pally footwork is on point. And the simple fact that you get to customize your dueling gear specifically for dueling a Hunter, with the end result being that you can easily make yourself yet again unkillable by stacking way more MP5 gear than the Hunter can effectively deal with, or frost resistance gear to make the ice trap reset simply non-viable. Essentially, the sad truth is that you can cheese enough in duels versus Hunters that it becomes a joke. A 10 to 15 minute duel that you ultimately simply cannot lose. Thus, the final tally in total is that as a Paladin, you cannot be killed in the open world 1v1 versus a Hunter, you cannot be killed 1v1 versus a Hunter in Battlegrounds, and you cannot die 1v1 versus a Hunter in duels. The only way Paladins lose to Hunters in PvP is if they push too hard for the win, fail, and subsequently find themselves having expended too many resources in the attempt, and thus are unable to recover in time before the Hunter takes full advantage of this, which is typically how Hunters win versus most inexperienced or improperly geared Paladins. However, the general rule here is that if you are thinking and playing purely defensively as a Paladin, then the Hunter simply has no way to force the issue, period, and thus must accept a draw in the matchup if that is what the Paladin is looking for. So that brings us to the other side of the coin. If the Hunter being purely offensive and the Paladin being purely defensive equals a stalemate, what happens when the Hunter is on the defense and the Paladin is attempting to push offense? The short answer to that is that even if both sides are playing as well as they can reasonably be expected to, the Paladin wins roughly 80% of the time, with that number being closer to 90% due to Hunters typically not knowing how to deal with a Paladin player playing properly, and even worse, rarely being geared correctly to even have a chance against a smart and tactically minded Paladin player. To show you what I mean, Here we have a list of gear and abilities that should be expected for a good hunter player to have at their disposal in a fight, complete with their cooldown timers, as well as a simple list of abilities for any good paladin player worth their salt and experience to have, likewise complete with their cooldown timers. In fact, the gear as seen here is what I would consider to be the default Paladin toolkit gear set, to be worn at all times, as much as possible, not knowing what kind of fight you as the Paladin player might get into. As in my opinion, it is the perfect all-comers gear set to have, primarily on account of the fact that if you do find yourself in one of the few matchups that this default gear set cannot handle, you can just use what bits of it you do not need to escape from the threat, drop combat, gear swap to the tools you do need, mount up, and come back in for round 2. A good example of this is versus Warlock, where you would much rather either have a Mithril Insignia trinket or Shadow Resist gear than Rocket Boots or Gnomish Netomatic. In which case, you can just use those 2 items to temporarily peace out, gear swap, and then come right back in for more. However, against Hunter, Rogue, Druid, Warrior, Shadow Priest, Shaman, and even Mage, this toolkit is often more than sufficient to get the job done, or even worse, as this toolkit can often be more than sufficient to get major cooldowns off of your opponent before using that exact same gear to drop combat just long enough to swap to even better dueling gear for the remainder of the matchup, giving you many easy victories due to this tactical flexibility that you might otherwise not have gotten. This toolkit has, in my experience, no weaknesses, and you will learn to love it. But back to this matchup in particular, using just our lowly default Paladin gear setup. As you can see here, we now have the options available for the Paladin to close with and ultimately stick to the Hunter on the left, and the Hunter's standard toolkit to prevent just such a thing from happening on the right. Down below we have icons representing our class and theirs, with the distance that one needs to cover between the classes in order to win. In the case of the Hunter, this distance is roughly 35 yards. Now for some fun facts to know. The default movement speed for a character in World of Warcraft is 8 yards per second, with that number being 8.64 yards per second with the move speed enchantment on boots, which everyone should always have. Furthermore, in classic World of Warcraft, the melee range of a character is 8 yards from their character's invisible hitbox. Put this all together, and it means that we as the Paladin player must close a minimum of 27 yards in order to be within melee range of our target. But realistically, we are going to want even more than that, as otherwise it will be very easy for the Hunter to shake us off of them with something as simple as a grenade, and you taking 0.5 seconds of reaction time to shrug it off with your trinket or bubble. Now, if you can do the math, I am sure you have noticed by now that with the 3-second grenade stun, you as the Paladin should be able to close roughly 26 of the 27 yards before the Hunter can even react. Furthermore, if you are fast on using your trinket to shrug off the boar charge stun, and your opponent is slow in trinketing away their pally stun, which has a 10-yard range, or God forbid the Hunter isn't even using a pet that stuns or CCs like a boar, then you as the Paladin can easily get within range of your target just by nading them and going ham even at max range. And with the gear shown here used, as we will later describe, you should win fairly regularly with just your raw brute force DPS behind too many speed-focused cooldowns for the Hunter to handle. But screw that noob shit, we can do better. These potions cost gold after all. So instead of doing this, what you should do as a Paladin is to first spend a little time sustaining yourself, healing a bit, and seeing if this Hunter is going to do anything stupid. Stupid such as throw a grenade at you and try to stop you from healing and increase their DPS, or mana pot because they were getting low on mana and they could. Since you cannot be killed anytime soon, make it a point to play and act like a noob, and just give your opponent the time and space to make a mistake that will ultimately cost them the fight later. In fact, this is something of a mantra for most good Paladin players. Giving your opponent the time and the space to make a mistake is ultimately invaluable if you can in fact do that. Now, it is not necessarily to do any of this, But such little things are needed to beat the best hunters, mostly on account of the fact that if said hunter isn't actually making a mistake, then you at least know that you are not dealing with the average huntard player. And more frighteningly, that the hunter is not thinking he is dealing with the average paladin player, which is more information in your corner ultimately, and should put you on edge. Other signs that you are dealing with a skilled hunter are whether or not they sick their pet on you. If they do, go all in on killing the pet. Stuns, nades, sappers, consecrations. Just go nuts trying to murder death kill their pet, as you can easily use Blessing of Protection to recover and wait out the 1-minute timer for your CDs to come back up. Next, as the hunter's mana starts to get low, and in this case we are assuming the hunter has a boar and wasn't used stupidly, start running away, again feigning noob. The hunter will follow, but due to low mana levels, the hunter will simply not do enough damage at the 35-yard range to force the paladin to need to stop and heal. This will likely result in the hunter going aspect of the cheetah for the plus 30% movement speed boost, so that they can close a bit better and start using their auto attack. Now, for those of you who do not know, hunters in classic World of Warcraft cannot move and shoot simultaneously, but they can move and shoot to a degree if they stop in between auto attack timer resets for about 0.5 seconds to get off their auto attack shot. This usually results in the hunter needing to get a fair bit closer than 35 yards, however, with that distance being 4 yards closer exactly, but most hunters will come roughly 6 yards closer to the paladin just to be safe. Now for the fun part. After a few of these stop, start auto attacks, or just from raw experience, you should start to get a good idea of the cooldown timer of your opponent's weapon, and an effort should be made to turn on the hunter with a grenade right as they start their 0.5 second stop moving auto attack trick. Now, a good hunter will not take the bait and just start running immediately. However, this is far from the norm, and you as the paladin player can easily get another 3 yards closer to your target just because they want to get off that one auto attack against your unkillable ass before running for some odd psychological reason. And thus we now find ourselves with our target nade stunned and us needing to close only 26 yards in 3 seconds, rather than the original 35, which with movement speed enchanted boots puts us at 25.96 yards covered in 3 seconds and placing us comfortably within melee range of the hunter. Make sure to trade Pally Trinket for Hunter Pet Charge Stun instantaneously if they try to use that to stop you, to avoid Charge Stun into Scatter Shot combo. Now to be clear, this turn on your enemy and nade him should have also triggered an offhand weapon swap on your end, from Shield into Skull of Impending Doom. This is typically not needed, however, if you forget and have skills, but if you are going to do this, you might as well do it right. And from here it will take 30 seconds from this point before Skull of Impending Doom can be used. We will remember that. Now you might be saying to yourself, what if they trinketed the nade? Well, in that case, if they did, it's a 100% easy kill, as you can easily pop speed boots to close the distance, as plus 70% movement speeds for 20 seconds easily beats 50% movement speed for 15 seconds that the hunter may or may not get from using a speed potion, especially at these ranges. Or you can just net them for 10 seconds into a 6-second stun, both of which they can now do nothing about, and they are ultimately screwed. Trinketing nade equals death for a hunter. Teach them this if they do. Scattershot be damned. So now you are on top of the hunter and giving him the business with your one-hander of choice. Their pet is likely chewing on you, and your hit points are probably down to roughly 70% or lower. Let none of this concern you, as you are all in on the kill from this point on out. From here, the hunter has a very limited amount of options to attempt to get you off of them, none of which will actually save them. The first is to attempt to nade you, which you will happily sit if they land, letting the hunter get whatever range they can. Then you pop rocket boots and chase after them, whereupon they may pop Scattershot and Speed Potion themselves to get away from you. Now, to be honest, this is ultimately not that big of a deal. You, being the smart pally, just sit the 4-second Scattershot and let the hunter run for his life. As 9 times out of 10, said hunter will not simply run full bore in one direction for as long as they possibly can, attempting to wait out your speed boots, and will instead opt to get their maximum range of 35 yards before re-engaging upon you. This, as you might imagine, is a big mistake that they will invariably make, as 70% movement speed for 20 seconds tends to beat 50% movement speed for 15 seconds, even if the hunter was smart enough to get off the full 4-second head start and keep going. Behind this, you still have Stun, Net, Speed Pot, Skull of Impending Doom, and Bubble to their Trinket and Ice Trap. From this point on, very few hunters have any hope of surviving so long as you simply say Bubble to counter Ice Trap as the Paladin, and simply Leroy Jenkins them down from here via having way too many speed boosts for them to counter, one after the other. Just try and remember that the speed boosts are for catching up with your target, not for sticking to your target, and to have Skull of Impending Doom ready for eating ice traps if your bubble is on cooldown for whatever reason, and you should be fine. In conclusion, beating a hunter with this gear ultimately can be just as simple as knowing that a 3-second stun and a 4-second scatter shot does not well counter 15 seconds of plus 50% movement speed, 10 seconds of immobilization, 6 seconds of stun, 20 seconds of plus 60 or 70% movement speed, and 10 seconds of plus 60% movement speed. And when you are throwing all of that at a hunter behind Trinket, Bubble, and with the intelligence of how to close on them off a mere single grenade hit, you will find all too often that you can kill hunters through just about damn near anything with this much bonus movement speed. Nades, snares, rocket helms, mind control caps, tidal charms, and sleep dust be damned. Finally, now that we have talked about how to get your time on target opportunity against such an elusive foe, we need to discuss just how much DPS you need to maintain during this time on target that you have bought for yourself before the hunter's CDs come back up and you invariably lose the fight. The answer to this is one of simple math. You as the Paladin player will have 30 seconds between feigned deaths and thus ice traps, as the hunter's ice trap requires the hunter to be out of combat in order to use. This effectively gives you, as the Paladin, 40 plus seconds of beat stick time to massage the hunter to death, 30 seconds for the CD on feigned death, and 10 more for Gnomish Net, as the moment they put down the second ice trap, that is your moment to net them for the extra 10 seconds of time on target. To say nothing of then using Skull of Impending Doom to simply eat the ice trap for another 30 plus seconds of time on target. However, truth be told, if you are finding yourself needing to do any of these things, then something has gone very outside the norm indeed, as 30 seconds of time on target should have been more than enough time to kill even a well-geared hunter with a so-so geared Paladin. For example, a frighteningly well-geared hunter can be expected to have 5k hit points, with that number going closer to 6k hit points with Whipperroot and 7k hit points with Healing Potion. Now compare that to a decently well-geared Paladin in full T2 using Ebon Hand's measly 200 to 220 DPS depending on oils. You can expect to be doing 180 hit point damage to the hunter per second of time on target. 30 seconds of this later, and even the best geared hunters are down around 5,400 hit points, with that number being closer to 6k out of their possible 7k due to the initial burst of Judgment and Thorium Grenade damage. This is easily enough damage to drop the hunter into Hammer of Wrath range, and to thus secure the victory. Yet the point I am trying to make here is a rather simple one. Despite the ease at which I am professing this matchup to be, using the tactics and strategies I have described, your DPS is still very close to not being sufficient for this matchup as a Paladin. As such, it is highly advisable that you do not even try to fight a hunter period with any gear of any kind without having sufficient DPS to kill a hunter inside of 30 seconds of time on target. as it is just a good rule of thumb and gives you plenty of leeway in tools to work with if for whatsoever reason you find yourself having to play around a second ice trap, which typically is the result of either a critical potion heal, a super try-hard item being used such as Arena Grand Master Trinket, Tidal Charm, Magic Dust, Rocket Helm, or Mind Control Cap, which are all items that if you see being used should be seen as a sign of weakness on your opponent's part, not one of strength. Just test to see if the hunter has rocket boots on top of all of this try-hard, and or reset for another 5 minutes and try again. Eventually the hunter will simply admit defeat, or run out of exotic items to throw at you. It is up to you as the unkillable turd in this matchup to decide just how try-hard you want to be in order to match your opponent's try-hard desperations. Personally, I prefer to roll my eyes, use rocket boots or whatever zoom I have left available to peace out from the fight, mount up, and then stalk the hunter whilst mounted. 9 times out of 10, I will go get a nice pre-charge wreck bomb on my best two-hander, swap to a death ray trinket, and come back mounted to show said hunter just what try-hard really looks like if they have not left my territory already, by wreck bombing them out of existence off the back of a Rocket Helm into Death Ray Judge Hit Sapper Charge combo. An instant attack combo that can do well over 5k hit point damage consistently, utterly deleting most enemies. It's something any Reckoning Paladin can do regularly every 5 minutes with Rocket Helm, Viking Helm, or Magic Dust against most classes. But it's just that much sweeter to beat classes like the Hunter using fair tactics, and saving the true what-the-fuckery, such as this and Predator Pally, a Rocket Boots into Invisibility Potion into Wreck Bomb combo, for those classes that truly deserve it, namely mages and any 1v2s you might encounter where your options for victory are otherwise rather limited. Anyways, this has been PallyTime215 on how to Paladin vs. Hunter, and I will see you all in the next video. Happy hunting!